Hello everyone and welcome to this test of the 4K UHD Blu-ray of James Cameron's Titanic. Please note that this is the American disc, as the French version is currently unavailable here. I'm not going to insult you by introducing you to this film or its director. Unless you've been living in a cave for the past few years, I think everything has already been said. In my opinion, Cameron is at the peak of his art with this film. From the very first seconds, with James Horner's music, he takes me with him right up to the last shot. And that's the case every time I see this film. It's a masterclass on every level: narration, acting, direction, photography, music, costumes, sets, attention to detail, reconstruction, use of technology, the list goes on, and I'll never tire of it. A truly great romantic disaster movie of the kind you don't see anymore. The film was shot in 35mm with Arriflex 35-3, Panavision Panaflex Gold 2 and Panavision Panaflex Platinum cameras, with Panavision Primo spherical lenses, and was finished in 239:1. For this edition, the film is offered in Dolby Vision, HDR10, and there is a new Dolby Atmos version track. This disc also contains a Dolby Digital 5.1 French track. There are 3 commentaries on this disc: James Cameron's, the cast and crew, and a commentary by historians Don Lynch and Ken Marshall. This edition does not contain a HD version but a bonus disc that includes a new documentary, Titanic: Stories from the Heart, a 4-part documentary, Reflections on Titanic, 25 years later with James Cameron, deleted scenes with James Cameron introduction and optional commentary, behind-the-scenes presentation hosted by John Landau, additional behind-the-scenes featurettes, deep dive presentation narrated by James Cameron, a ship's odyssey, the Titanic crew video, Videomatics, 4 visual effects segments, trailer presentation hosted by John Landau, Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On music video, still galleries, Titanic scriptment by James Cameron, storyboard sequences, production artwork, photographs, Ken Marshall's painting gallery, concept posters, and a module on credits. Although there are plenty of extras, they don't include all the extras found on previous editions. Many featurettes, trailers, commentaries, and even documentaries are missing. So let's talk about this image, and I'd advise you to get some aspirin because I'm going to give you a headache. So before going any further, I'd like to make it clear that it's absolutely not my intention to incriminate anyone or to denigrate the work that's been done. I have a deep respect for the work of the artists and the people who work in the labs, and also for James Cameron. There's just about everything and anything that's been said about this restoration. The most pertinent information comes from Bill Hunt, a journalist from the Digital Bits website who has been in contact with a member of the Lightstorm company who managed the restoration. The original negative was scanned in 4K in 2012, and a digital intermediate was made in 2K at the time. As for the VFX shots, they recovered the best possible sources from interpositives. In fact, in those days, film was scanned, digital VFX were done, then reshoot on film and integrated into the negative. So in terms of photochemistry alone, there were several generations. And in terms of scanners and digital files, we didn't have the same amount of information in 1997 as we do today. This 2K digital intermediate was used to produce the 2012 Blu-ray and the 3D theatrical version. When we rescan the original negative, we recover an enormous amount of information. This information is stored in the form of a logarithmic file, which will be used to make the SDR and HDR versions for theaters and home. For this new 2023 version, they took the 4K scans from 2012 and made a new digital intermediate in 4K. And for the VFX, they made sure to get the best possible quality. So, contrary to what you may have read, there was no new scan. In fact, if I take the 2023 4K version, and on a track above it I put the 2012 version, by making a difference I'll be able to compare and see that it's really the same source. You see, if I move the source, you can see the difference right away. Unrolling the whole film, I still found a few shots that didn't have the same framing. Who knows why? But in any case, over 95% of the footage, the 2 editions, are pixel perfect, apart from the edges of the image, but that's of no consequence. So far, so good. So let's start by saying that the image is very beautiful. Russell Carpenter's photography is beautifully represented here. So yes, it's magnificent, I'm not disputing that. It's a pure pleasure to discover this film with this new transfer. However, something happened when I looked at this shot. A kind of inception that drove me crazy. Because if we assume that they've gone back to the 2012 4K scans, we're supposed to have more information in the image on the HDR version. How come we still have banding here that looks similar to what we have on the 2012 Blu-ray? Admittedly, the banding is a bit toned down, but there's still a lot of similarity. The first thing that jumps out about this edition is the level of image detail. Sure, it's night and day, and contrary to what has been said, this has nothing to do with the scan. The scan used in 2012 is the same as on this 2023 version. What do you think happened on this shot to make it go from this to that? Artificial intelligence. In fact, the VFX shots that have lost material due to the various operations they underwent at the time of their creation really needed it. If I take my HD file in H.264, I throw it into Topaz, which is one of the references for recovering detail based on AI, look what it comes up with. Look at the insane detail recovered on the rivets. I was at the limit of blur and I become as sharp as their 4K version starting from a compressed HD source. So yes, there's been a bit of a facelift, but not just on the VFX shots. Even if the sharpening isn't systematic throughout the film, you can still see that some shots, even those that are not VFX, have had it. The level of detail is surgical. It's almost too much. In all the tests I've done, I've never seen such a leap in definition. The other side of the coin is that, having pulled back on the signal in this way, some things are now much more visible than before. In fact, some green screen extractions are more visible. What passed for 2K projection at the time becomes more problematic when you accentuate details and contours, and you can see things I'd never noticed before, like the floor sliding here, Billy Zane's wig, or the 3D characters sweeping the floor without a broom. Well, I'm only quibbling, the VFX at the time was simply prodigious and still holds up well. Regarding encoding, we have a maximum bitrate of 98 megabits per second with an average of 50 megabits per second. For a 3-hour film with so many audio and commentary tracks and a Dolby enhancement layer, it's doing pretty well. This certainly explains the absence of DTS HD master audio tracks. That's a lot to fit on a 100 GB disc. If I look at the metadata of the HDR file, I see max fall 196 nits and max CLL 283 nits. For HDR, that's not very high. But hey, why not? These are indications that may not always reflect reality. And anyway, who cares about the number of nits? Let's take a look at what's happening on the signal side. Because we're hearing the praises of wide gamut and Dolby Vision in all the different reviews. And it has to be said that we don't have much to go beyond BT709. There's a bit of P3 here and there, but it's very timid. Where's the wide gamut? It's a bit strange. For HDR, I checked the light intensities, and as stated, we rarely go above 300 nits. Once again, it's their film, they grade as they like. I have no worries about that. I do find it strange, though, because there are a lot of shots with high luminosity and brilliance that could give the image a great dynamic. But hey, they chose to stay at low levels. I don't see why not. And here's where I really start to get my brain in knots. What's the point of a Dolby Vision layer on a volume of color and intensities of this level? Let me remind you that Dolby for Home HDR is metadata that accompanies the signal to generate high-quality dynamic tone mapping. To be sure, if the intensities are too high in terms of color and luminosity, they will be converted according to the characteristics of the Dolby Vision compatible device. But I'm sorry, with BT709 and 300 nits, there's almost no need for tone mapping. The role of Dolby Vision is really very limited here. Then we'll get to what bothers me most, the highlights. In previous tests I've carried out, each time the original negative has been rescanned, you can see a clear difference in the way the highlights are managed, and you generally recover a lot of detail. But here, if I compare SDR and HDR, we almost don't recover any information. Look at the sky here, it's completely overexposed. I don't mind them being backlit, you should be able to see more in HDR than in SDR. The hair on Rose here, overexposed too? The highlights on the spotlights here. The hair on Rose here again. The speculars here. There's virtually no difference between HDR and SDR. In fact, the more I compare, the more I feel like I'm looking at the same image. So take another aspirin, because I'm going to finish you off. When I put the two images side by side, and look at the histograms. That's SDR. That's HDR, nothing shocks you? SDR, HDR. SDR, HDR. It's almost the same thing. There are differences, of course, because it's not the same encoding, the same pixel size or the same color volume, but look if I pull a little on my SDR signal. It's the same image, it's just brighter. So obviously it's done in a hurry, but if I go through the film and apply the same settings, I often come back to the same thing. I don't understand what I'm looking at, it's beyond me, there's no logic. As for the grain, rest assured, they've preserved as much of the original grain as possible. Taking a step back, they are limited by the nature of the film. There is a large number of VFX shots that have been worked in 2K, certainly with a significant loss of information compared to the original negative. If they rescan the original negative for the untouched shots, there must be a huge difference. They had to make a choice to strike a balance between the two and not alter the film's original look. So in that sense it's a success, but I'm still rather puzzled by the final result. It's very beautiful indeed, but given all the information you'd expect from a restoration and an HDR version, I have more reservations about it. As far as audio is concerned, the film features a new Dolby Atmos mix. Let me tell you that the track is analyzed by the Trinnov processor, the only tool to offer live visualization of objects. So what about it? Well, like the color grading, we're going to stay faithful to what we had before. So no dynamic objects. Of course, they've added channels to the ceiling to increase the sense of immersion, and it works very well. But don't expect a profusion of objects, there aren't any. The mix is magnificent, James Horner's music is sublimated, and many details are brought to the fore. To be honest, I was expecting to hear objects everywhere, and I was thinking that they could have played around with the helicopter, and with all the waterspouting scenes too. But I also fully understand the fact that they didn't want to distort the original work, and it's totally consistent with what they've done with the color grading. The Atmos adds a sense of envelopment, but it remains fairly discreet for much of the film, right up to the moment of the shipwreck. That's when your subwoofer wakes up, and believe me, it's going to be put to good use, especially in the part where the ship breaks up and sinks. As for our Dolby Digital 5.1 French track, it's rather timid by comparison. So the review. With everything I'd read and seen, I wasn't really expecting this. Yes, it's beautiful, it's better encoded, the image is very nice and very detailed, if not too much so. Given the nature of the film and these elements, I think it was certainly complicated to do anything else, but all the same, I have the feeling that I'm looking at a somewhat hybrid version. Is it the ultimate restoration as everyone claims? Yes, as long as you don't put your nose in it. And here too, I'm going to put a big caveat on my analysis. Who cares? I dig and I chase the mite with a rubber band, but in the end it doesn't do much good, and above all, I don't want to deprive you of the pleasure of discovering this new edition. I'm just trying to bring a different perspective, and maybe I'm going about it all wrong. In any case, this is how James Cameron wanted to share his work with us. It's his vision, so it's respected. And that didn't stop me from shedding a tear while watching this new edition. So mission accomplished, who cares about the rest? This video is now finished, I hope you enjoyed it. Don't hesitate to share and subscribe. Take care, bye.